Hi, and welcome back to the Pelvic Empowerment IBS series. My name is Tori, and I am a doctor of physical therapy who specializes in pelvic dysfunction, which means I treat things that can go wrong around the pelvis, and this includes bowel dysfunction, which means I run into humans with IBS in my clinic often. In May of this year, I decided to try and unpack everything that I've learned about IBS in a video series. And today I wanted to add a fourth installment in this video series that builds on the previous videos but really deep dives into IBS and lactose and gluten intolerances. Like I said, I will be building on some of the topics discussed in the previous videos, like the proposal of IBS as brain-gut axis dysfunction and the idea of a dysfunctional gastrocolic reflex playing a key role in IBS symptoms. If that sounds like a lot of mumbo jumbo to you, please go check out my previous videos so that you can have a solid foundation coming into this video. Links to those videos, timestamps, and any studies mentioned in this video will all be in the description below. So then let's begin by discussing lactose intolerance. Lactose refers specifically to a sugar that is found in milk products. So someone with a true lactose intolerance wouldn't be allergic to lactose, but would find it difficult to digest foods with lactose in it, which are primarily dairy products. The good news about lactose intolerance is that it can be tested relatively easily with something called a hydrogen breath test, which we discussed in the third video in this series. Essentially, a hydrogen breath test would test for not only lactose intolerance, but also other sugar intolerances, including sucrose, fructose, and sorbitol. This breath test can also be used to diagnose small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, and can give you an idea of how quickly or slowly food is moving through your small intestine. Because gut health is such an individual thing, I think that all of this information would be valuable information as an individual trying to learn more about his or her unique gut. If a hydrogen breath test is available to you, I say why not take it and learn if you are intolerant of certain sugars, including lactose, if SIBO is at play at all in your current condition, and how well food is moving through your small intestine. All of this information is useful in that you can use it to further tailor your diet to your specific individual needs. The tricky thing about lactose intolerance and IBS is that it overlaps with other mechanisms that might potentially be at play with IBS symptomology. If you subscribe to the idea that IBS is at its core a brain-gut axis dysfunction, which we discuss in detail in the first installment of this series, and more specifically a gastrocolic reflex dysfunction, which we discuss in the second installment of this series, then high-fatty foods are going to trigger IBS symptoms regardless of them containing lactose. So even if a hydrogen breath test reveals that you aren't lactose intolerant, what foods are almost always high in fat? Dairy foods. So is it lactose intolerance, or is it a dysfunctional gastrocolic reflex triggered by high fatty foods, including dairy? From what I can gather, if you have IBS and you want to manage your symptoms through diet, eliminating dairy is going to be beneficial regardless of whether or not you're lactose intolerant. If you aren't sure that you have IBS and you're suspecting a lactose intolerance, get a hydrogen breath test and find out. Gluten intolerance, however, is not as clear-cut. Gluten is a protein found in grains, namely wheat, rye, and barley, and has been recognized as an IBS trigger food for years now. A true gluten allergy, as in an allergic reaction, not an intolerance, manifests as celiac disease, which affects about 1% of the population. However, gluten intolerance, or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, affects closer to 10% of the population. And there seems to be quite a bit of overlap between non-celiac gluten sensitivity and IBS. In fact, this 2019 study investigating that overlap found that it is likely that a subset of patients presenting with IBS actually have non non-celiac gluten sensitivity. In addition, it's likely that individuals with IBS may also have symptoms triggered by gluten. Testing for gluten intolerance, much like testing for IBS, is tricky. Because there are no reliable biomarkers that can rule in or rule out gluten intolerance, as in we can't take a blood sample and see if someone clearly has a gluten intolerance, the diagnostic criteria are almost ridiculously cumbersome. The next section of this video is going to be dry, but I want you to understand where we are in the diagnosis of non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Firstly, it wasn't until 2015 that a criteria, Salerno's expert criteria, was created in an attempt to standardize the gluten intolerance diagnostic procedure. I am going to use this image and do my best to walk you through it to try and simplify this diagnostic criteria to the best of my abilities. First and foremost, both celiac disease and a wheat allergy must be ruled out. Then, before step 1, the person who is suspecting a non-celiac gluten sensitivity must eat a normal gluten-containing diet for at least 6 weeks so that the baseline symptoms can be established. That in and of itself is a tall order. This means that if you've found that eating a gluten-free diet has been helpful to you, you'd have to agree to eating gluten again for at least 6 weeks to establish your baseline symptoms. As you can imagine, it's hard to get people to agree to do that. Then a gluten-free diet is implemented for an additional 6 weeks, ideally under the supervision of a dietitian that is as strict as the gluten-free diet someone with celiac disease would follow. 1 to 3 main symptoms are measured subjectively 1 time a week. If the person has improved, meaning that at least one of the symptoms has improved by 30% with no worsening of the other symptoms, then that person goes on to step 2. If the person hasn't improved, then she doesn't have a gluten intolerance. Step 2 is called the gluten challenge, and it is a 3-week procedure where the person undergoing the procedure will be eating gluten for one of those 3 weeks, but she doesn't know which week it is. It goes like this. The first week, that person eats her usual gluten-free diet and either a placebo or gluten. The following week, she eats her usual gluten-free diet. The third week, she again eats her usual gluten-free diet and either a placebo or gluten. A questionnaire assessing the 1 to 3 main symptoms previously identified is taken at baseline, and then every day during the gluten challenge. And then, after 16 weeks of testing, if a variation of at least 30% between the gluten and placebo challenge is detected, the person has a gluten intolerance or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Like I said, I know that was dry, but I want you to understand exactly where we are in the diagnostic process of actually diagnosing someone with non-celiac gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance. That's it. That's the best we've got. A 16-week process that exposes someone to multiple weeks of a normal gluten diet, which means multiple weeks of really intense symptoms for some people. It's a demanding test, and I'm not fully convinced that it's a realistic test to undergo. If it were me, here are some of the things that I would consider. It's easy to get lost in the complexity of both food and gut health. For example, the science isn't totally rock solid that it's gluten that is the issue for humans with IBS or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. According to this 2017 review, several components of wheat are potentially harmful for non-celiac gluten sensitivity and IBS patients, including gluten proteins, lipopolysaccharides, amylase trypsin inhibitors, wheat germ agglutinins, and fermentable oligo di and monosaccharides and polyols, which are FODMAPs. Just with that tidbit of information, it becomes tempting to try and really deep dive into the details. But if you do that, you might lose the forest for the trees. According to this 2015 literature review, current evidence suggests that symptoms of IBS improve with the gluten-free diet in about half of the patients tested. So if you truly have IBS, there's a 50% chance, a flip of a coin, that a gluten-free diet would help ease some of your symptoms. If you have true gluten intolerance, then a gluten-free diet would, in theory, eliminate all of your symptoms. Either way, you could trial a gluten-free diet for 4 to 6 weeks, track your symptoms diligently, and at the end of the trial period, make a decision on how to move forward based on how you feel. Finally, if we fall back to our original hypothesis that IBS is truly a brain-gut axis dysfunction at its core, it may be that the types of food that have gluten in them, like bread and cereal and pasta, contain insoluble fiber. And it's actually the insoluble fiber content, not the gluten, that causes digestive issues in someone with IBS. Which leads nicely into the next video in this series, which will outline the difference between insoluble and soluble fiber. And the following video, the 6th installment in the series, will synthesize all of the information that we've talked about in the first 5 videos and weave it into easily digestible dietary considerations for managing IBS symptoms. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I am really enjoying creating this IBS series, and I am genuinely so excited and so honored to be doing request videos. So thank you so much for watching and commenting and requesting. It means the world to me. Other plans that I have for the series after I cover insoluble and soluble fiber and then kind of unpack and repack everything that we've talked about in the 5 videos leading up to the 6th video where I really dive into dietary considerations for managing IBS. I also plan on covering IBS and its relationship to SIBO and FODMAPs, as well as IBS and its relationship to anxiety and sleep and exercise. I also plan on diving into other treatment options like fecal transplants, Linzess, Trulance, and alternative medicine. But if you have a different IBS related topic that you'd like me to cover, please let me know in the comments below. I do try really hard to read and respond to all of my comments. I officially made a playlist for this series on my channel's homepage, so hopefully that puts them in the right order and makes them a little bit easier to watch congruently. And please, if you found this video helpful, like it, share it, and finally subscribe to my channel for more content, not only about pelvic things, but also about life things. Don't forget to check me out on Instagram, and thank you so much again for watching. I will see you in the next video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.